Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Frank Gistalti. I am your VP of Intelligence at the Medical Alley Association. And I want to say thank you for spending a bit of your time with us and with your peers to talk about what is the largest investor in health technology and really in technology companies in Minnesota in Medical Alley, the SBIR STTR programs. We've got a wonderful group of people here today who are going to share their experiences, share some information on the programs and the opportunities you can take advantage of. Two very important things as we go through this session. First, ask questions at any point. You can use the chat function or use the Q&A function. I'd prefer if you use the Q&A function. It's a little bit easier for me to manage while managing a couple of streams. And then second, we are in the wonderful world of work from home and we have our real lives going on all around us. So if you see a dog or a cat, a family member, or a noise from any one of us, be empathetic about it, and we'll be the same to you if that happens. So again, my name's Frank Gistalti, and I'm so appreciative of you being here today. We're gonna kick off the discussion just with quick intros, and then I've got a set of kind of starter questions to get the dialogue going, to hear some of the stories of our guests here. But again, please, anytime if you have a question or if you want to know more about something, throw it into that Q&A thing. I'll be watching it closely and we'll pop it up. So with that, we'll kick it off and we'll start with intros. I'm going to do the round robin, and Sbir, if you'd give us a little bit of background on you and on your company.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Frank. Great to be here and hopefully be able to shed some of our insight over the last few years of SBIR trials and tribulations. But Habit Aware is the company that I'm part of, and we make a wearable device that helps people manage certain compulsive behaviors. That is a class of mental health disorder. We've been on the market as a consumer electronic device since 2017. And we've also been awarded 3 SBIR grants, 2 from the National Science Foundation and 1 from the NIH.
Oh, fantastic. Roughly how much in total would you say those 3 have been?
Amount is the NSF is there are 2 phase 1s and 1 phase 2. The phase 2 is obviously the big one with that was $1 million, and the phase 1s were about 500 or so, a little more than 500, so a little over 1.5 million.
Wonderful, thank you. And then James, you're next up on my screen, if you would.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm James Kent. I'm currently the CEO of a company called AmpliRx. We manage physical therapy clinics. We're also developing a new therapy for that market. I'm also the CEO of the healthcare division for a small private equity group. And prior to this, I was a partner and a chief operating officer at Rsttr, where we did early stage device development. I've been a medtech entrepreneur for quite a while now. And especially at Rsttr, we utilized the SBIR program extensively. It was a strategic part of our business plan. All phases, phase 1, phase 2, we did fast track applications, direct to phase 2. We kind of ran the gamut.
Very cool, thank you. And then last but most certainly not least, Pat, if you'd introduce yourself and a bit about the unique and really important work you're doing.
Unmute. Thank you, Frank. Hello, everyone. So my name is Pat Dillon, and I work with firms like Habit Aware and others in the state to help them transition from their idea stage to commercialization, with a strong focus on, certainly helping them get funding through these 2 federal programs. And personally, I've been involved with the program since 1994. That's about 28 years. And I can tell you that the focus these days is certainly still remains on research and development and new product development, but also a strong focus on commercialization. So you'll hear more from me throughout the webinar, but that's a little bit about my background and so forth. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, and Pat, I'd like to ask you the first question to kind of give us a baseline or a level set of what we're talking about. And I know there's a lot in the program, there's a lot of complexities to it, but could you give our audience kind of what would be the nickel version or snapshot of what SBIR and STTR is?
So at the end of the day, it's federal research funding that is set aside just for small businesses, and small meaning one person company all the way up to 500 employees. And so the funding is set aside by the agencies that are required to participate. And there's 11 agencies that are required by law to participate in the program. And so this funding is available to support science and technology, engineering, and manufacturing across the spectrum. And of course, today our focus is on healthcare and medical and so forth. So there's really about 3 agencies that really focus on those aspects, and that being the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation, and then in some respects, the Department of Defense, mostly the Army Medical Research Command. So as a company, I liked what James had to say about being very strategic and leveraging this program. And I think when a company is thinking about pursuing this kind of funding, it should be a strategic business decision, and that you're in it for the long haul, and that you're in it to win it, basically. And it's complex, it's competitive, but it's also very doable. And we have several firms in the Twin Cities here or in Minnesota, and certainly across the country, that really leverage this funding to support their advanced R&D with the goal to commercialize. And of course, it's non-dilutive. It comes in the form of a grant or a contract, depending upon the federal agency. And what's really exciting, I think, about the NIH, SBIR, and STTR programs is that the funding is pretty significant. If you have a project that fits within one of their key priority areas, and you can request quite a bit of money through 3 different phases. So I'm, of course, a big proponent of the program. I built my career around these 2 federal programs, and they are not static by any means. And so they're constantly changing, and with reauthorization activities within Congress regarding the programs, they continue to change and evolve to match or mimic what's going on in industry, but also from a national perspective on translating and commercializing federally funded research and development that supports our economy and creates jobs and patents and wealth and so forth. So it's really it's a fantastic program. So I'm so glad that so many of you have decided to tune in today to hear about these 2 wonderful programs.
Thank you. Yeah. And James, I want to ask you about the strategic part in a sec, but Pat, just one quick follow-up on the money side of it. I'm sure it varies by a number of things, but roughly what is kind of the upper end of dollars that a company could pursue?
Oh, I'll answer that because this is near and dear to me all the time. So depending upon the institute within the National Institute of Health, and there's 27 institutes and centers to choose from, they have different funding levels. And typically, it's around maybe 250, 300,000 for the phase 1 project, but we've actually have had projects in the $500,000 and $600,000 range. Phase 2 can be upwards of $3 million, $4 million, depending upon the project. And when I think about, or when I work with companies on defining what is the scope of work and what's the funding stream, we're looking at the whole enchilada, if you will, from phase 1 all the way to what they call phase 2B, which is what they call a sequential phase 2. So that's typically maybe $5 to $6 million over a period of several years, but 3 projects or 3 proposals that sort of build off of each other. And this is I get excited about what is possible with some of these projects.
Perfect. Thank you. So that's a good segue then to ask James. You said when you guys were looking at this in Focus Start, it was a part of your business planning. Can you talk about that and how you guys thought about making this part of the capital stack and really a part of the way you went about building the business?
Sure. Part of it was potentially unique to us because of our overall business model. We would in-license from research institutions, mostly universities, at very early stage, past the proof of concept, but long before a device would be submitted to the FDA for clearance or approval. And the SBIR program was a good fit for that, for especially phase 1, for the early kind of rigorous, bench work that we would need to do to get to another level. And that could be an inflection point where you go out and raise angel funding or even try to talk to the VCs at that point. But it was really a nice injection at a critical point. But we'll talk about this further, I'm sure, but the process itself can be time intensive, labor intensive, and you have to be very patient. So, it was one of several levers we were trying to pull at the same time. We weren't going to count on SBIR funding to come through to keep the lights on. Otherwise, we'd still be waiting.
Right. So yeah, it was a part of your strategy, but it wasn't the strategy.
Correct. Yeah.
I do want to come back to that, but it sounds like you guys saw it as an opportunity to fund early stage, higher risk type of activities that probably, in this environment today, but even a few years ago, can be challenging to get equity investors behind, and this helped you advance the program.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It was, and we would peruse all of the solicitations. You find the institutes that are looking for research and development in an area that you are also working in. The pre-work was also important. I'm sure Pat will dive into that part, but you got to pick where you want to apply, and that part was important as well. But yeah, I would say it was something we thought about for every new potential license is there a grant opportunity for this?
Very interesting. So, and Samir, can you talk about it for Habit Aware? How did you guys approach pursuing SBIR type or Rsttr funding as part of your guys' planning and development?
Yeah, we weren't, I don't know that we were that we mapped out all the exact, levers, and SBIR was one from the beginning. We kind of learned about it as we were on our way to making the product. And it was really through, at a conference, we met a researcher who was really interested in the idea, and he kind of seeded that in our minds that, we should apply for a grant for this. And that really helped us a lot, because you need in putting together a compelling SBIR application, you really need a lot of different skill sets. So they're really looking at 2 aspects. One, the science has to be strong, obviously. And then 2, though equally important, is really the commercial plan. Can you convince reviewers that you actually want to and are capable of making a sustainable business out of this project? What they're really not that interested in, this varies a little bit by agency, but I think it's probably a true blanket statement, is they don't want the academic by himself who has an idea, but no real plans of commercializing this project to apply for an SBIR grant. So back to the point, we put together a group of, basically a few of us from our R&D side at Habit Aware, as well as clinical experts who are well published in this space and put together an application to really propose a novel and potentially game-changing solution for body-focused repetitive behaviors. And after a few tries, we got it accepted.
Very cool. And I appreciate the way you laid that out, that it is it's funding R&D, but it is commercially oriented. And the goal is to see technologies translated into products that, right, in our world at least, are going to help patients. And that this is about funding a business. Pat, I want to toss this over to you, but then ask the whole group. I want to talk a bit about kind of the processes and the kind of the misconceptions maybe, and start with just a question that probably has a longer answer than we have time for, but the question of, compared to going out and raising money from a VC or from angels, is this, and I know the answer is it depends, but is this easier, harder, the same, just different? Like if I'm an entrepreneur and I'm doing a startup, I may think, oh, I'm gonna have to deal with bureaucracy and all these things. Is it worse or not than trying to go and raise from a venture capitalist, for example? I'd ask the whole group, and maybe Pat, start with you, and then we'll round robin it.
Well, so if you're this single person company that needs to go out and raise capital, of course, you're going to start with family and friends to help maybe get things off the ground. You'll do that in concert with your effort to, seek NIH or NSF funding to support your R&D and commercialization pathway. So that's for the single person or early stage company. Company that's seeking investment from venture capitalists. I mean, I've never really actually worked with any of our companies except for one that was very successful in raising quite a bit of venture capital funding years ago. It's part of the mix, but I'm more on the very early stage, and you've raised maybe some money through others, and now you're stepping into this SBIR, STTR arena, or maybe you've decided that you're going to bootstrap it, and you can start that way. But I think for the purposes of the SBIR and STTR programs these days, and this actually started back in 2000 with the reauthorization of the programs. Congress put some language in the legislation that really encouraged the agencies, or more or less forced the agencies to really start looking at commercialization. And that has just grown since 2000. And so now, my conversations with people, really focuses on, well, what is the commercialization opportunity? What's the strategy? Have you raised money? Do you need to raise money? The agencies are looking for this kind of information even in the first proposal. Sbir will agree that the NSF, I always refer to them as the venture capitalists of the SBIR program, because they're very much focused on, our money is there to support, really de-risk this really cutting edge technology, but we know you're going to have to go out and raise additional capital. And so what's that plan? And so about 3 months ago, I did an analysis of all the agencies and what do they require as part of the commercialization story in a phase 1 proposal. And all of them require some discussion. It might be 6-7 pages like it is with NSF, it might be 4 pages like it is with the Department of Energy, certainly 1 page that deals with the market opportunity. So I think for companies, especially the startups, where you're a single person, it's like you have to have this commercialization pathway sort of laid out. We all know it's going to change, but have some plan. Do I need other capital to support this growth plan that I have?
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So maybe James and Sbir, the question to you, and I know it always varies, but if you could make a blanket statement, is it harder, easier, the same? Like, should I, as an entrepreneur going to start a company, think, this is just too much?
It's differently hard, I guess. It's not really harder or easier. It's not easy by any means, but it's definitely different. What you're looking for, or what the agencies are looking for, is very different than what a VC due diligence activity would be like. To Smir's point earlier, the rigor of the science and the technical writing is very high. And to Pat's point as well, the commercialization plan, especially for a phase 2 SBIR, needs to be pretty well put together and lay out a believable story for how your device gets from where it is to on the market. But not a lot of what they ask you is what a VC would ask you for, frankly. It's just a different process.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's really hard to compare. They're both hard, and they're just different. But no one's gonna give you that much money without you going through a few hoops.
If you're going to be an entrepreneur, it's going to be hard.
Yeah, and I think, just to follow up on that, with especially with the phase 2 commercialization plan, which is this either a 12-page or 15-page document that basically is in many ways sort of like a mini business plan. You're, as a company that's proposing phase 2, I mean, you're going to tell this story, and it does have to be credible. It can't be. And so when we work with companies on their phase 2 proposal, we're big partners with the University of Minnesota and their value proposition design course, which we encourage people to attend so that they can get a better understanding of what is the true market opportunity for their widget, and that those customer discovery interviews that they experience as part of that course, I mean, that kind of information gets dumped into that phase 2 proposal, that commercialization plan, because you're communicating to those reviewers that you've done your homework, you understand the market, you understand your customer, you understand what's really possible, your financing strategy, your revenue model, your intellectual property position. So these are all the sorts of things that come into play with respect to the commercialization. And of course, those are very much, I think, some of the same things that investors look for as well. What is your compelling competitive advantage, and who are your customers, and how big is that market? And so one thing that I will also say with what's going on within the agencies is they are, as a result of the focus by Congress on commercializing federally funded research, and it isn't just with SBIR and Rsttr, it's actually efforts that are underway within our academic institutions all across the country. And with the NSF, National Science Foundation Innovation Corps, which the U of M is an I-Corps site, there is this national effort to really translate federally funded research into commercializable products or services or other things that of course can generate impact.
And I suspect we have some attendees in the audience who might be working on that or interested in grabbing some of that technology. We've got a couple of questions that have come in from the audience, so I'm going to jump to those for a moment and then come back. The first one that had come in, Carl Stamp had asked about the utility of getting professional help on putting a grant in place. His question was, it seems like there are some organizations or individuals who are consistently more successful. Would you recommend, and so I guess question to everyone, engaging professional help, or is this a thing that you do on your own? And maybe Sbir, start with you and we'll come around on that.
Yeah, sure. I can't speak to, we have spoken to a few professional grant writers. We've never actually gone that route. It always just felt like it was going to take almost almost as much time to just communicate to them what we're trying to do as you know as to write it ourselves. And maybe this is just because we've gone through it already. There's certainly like a huge ramp up with that first application that you put in, and then after that your workload actually becomes a lot smaller because you're familiar. You actually can reuse a lot of previous materials depending on how similar or different the application is. And so I think that it's, the numbers I've seen, professional grant writers are about 30% successful, and whereas the average is about 15%. But I think that an organization that's committed to learning it and trying it and has time, they'll be just as successful as the professional ones. So I think it's probably a time commitment issue if you can actually communicate to them what you're trying to do.
So making that commitment to learning the process, doing it right, putting a good grant proposal forward and putting the work in.
Yeah, it pays dividends, right? Because that's stuff that you can reuse the next time. You don't have to learn all that stuff again.
I'll say that same person also said that he is an angel investor and loves to see when companies have SBIR funding in them. So this is a question we had when we were doing our prep, so I asked it of the group. What have been your experiences with, you have grants and then you're talking to other investors? How have they seen, a company that has SBIR, STTR funding?
Yeah, for us, it's been nothing but positive. I think that investors, there's no reason if you're invested in a company that you wouldn't prefer that company to have extra funds, extra runway, extra credibility. So we've always seen that as a positive.
Had a couple of other questions come in. Hang on one sec. Pat, I think this is one you can answer pretty well. The question is this type of funding mostly for cutting edge tech and science or even hardware? What about a startup that was solving a social problem with a tech-enabled service?
I think it all depends, first of all. But yeah, I think what's so unique about the NIH program is that the diversity and the broadness of the research areas, it's pretty substantial, and so we can always find a home for a project. And so you have to step back and ask the question, well, what's the unmet medical need? How will this particular solution or proposed solution address that need? And then of course, can you build a business around it? And then where does it start on what we call like the technology readiness level? Is it at a 2 or a 3, or is it maybe more at a 5 or 6? So these are kinds of questions that I go through with these companies that are considering funding, because we want to make sure that their project is a good fit. Has 150 to 200 hours of time to put together a proposal and then not be successful. And going back to the question about should I hire I call them a science writer. You really need somebody that can help write the science, if that's what the company is looking for. My personal perspective is that whoever possesses the idea, the concept, or the project is really the person that should write the proposal, but then also have outside assistance. And we provide that through the SBIR, STTR accelerator. We have different cohorts that we do throughout the year. And I have another one coming up in January with the National Institutes of Health, with the goal to help companies prepare and submit an application in April. And then we, so that's what we do to support companies. But
Pat, what's the website for that?
Just type in MN SBIR into Google and you should get right to our website.
That'd be the top search result.
Yeah, and then just go to NIH cohort it's kind of I don't want-
A practical question came in, which I should have asked at the beginning, which is, what is the difference between a phase 1 and a phase 2 grant?
So a phase 1 is typically a project where it's just focused on demonstrating the technical feasibility of the idea or the project. And every project is different. So it's a very generic description of what the phase 1 is. Phase 2 is where we get into more like prototype development phase. And typically a phase 1 is maybe 6 to 12 months, or with NIH, it can be up to 2 years. Phase 2 is typically, 2 years, and maybe even be 3 years, with NIH. I could cite the legislation, but I'm not going to do that because each agency just kind of does things differently, and they
But
really
yeah, that's generally the difference.
generally, yeah.
Yeah. You know, James and Samir, you have kind of implied this a little bit earlier, but the way the grant is written, the type of information you're conveying, maybe James, starting with you, could you talk about like when you're putting a grant together? I think yesterday you would use the term like scholarly. Can you talk a little bit about that experience of putting together and kind of what the writing is like? And then maybe I'll ask as a follow-up to the group, like the people who are reviewing these, who are those people and what are they like?
Well, I had the good fortune of not being the technically credentialed person in the office. So I was largely a reviewer for the guys with the actual experience. But I would say it's an academic process. It is rigorous. You need to have a very strong timeline. It's milestone driven, as Pat, I think, maybe mentioned. So you need specific aims that are very tight and have lots of evidence to back it up. And so the technical writing acumen is very high. But so is, to beat this point in, the business proposal needs to be very good as well. I was reminded of a piece of advice that's applicable here. It's probably applicable everywhere, but it's better to be really good or pretty good at all of the key factors than to be excellent at some and terrible at others. So if you're pretty good at every point of it, including a scientific plan that is very sound and the business portion, you will at least get a shot when it comes to the review time. But each agency, as Pat has said several times, is different, and they may be looking for different things. The review boards, I will probably say this wrong, but are largely made up of people who have done research in the field. I didn't see a lot of business leaders on the review boards. Occasionally, you'd see someone who was attached to industry, and they are experts in their fields and are looking for expertise in the field.
Makes a lot of sense. So knowing the audience that's going to be receiving it, tune your message appropriately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's the way to go.
Yeah. Samir, it looked like you were about to say something.
Oh, no, I think that I would concur with that assessment.
Yeah, so I would add this. So, with the National Institutes of Health, I mean, you have some control over where your proposal actually, which study group within NIH is actually going to be the reviewing body for your proposal. And you can look at the roster of people that are on that list, and it's mostly PhD, MD, and you've got people from industry. But there's only 3 people that are actually reviewing your proposal, but you won't know who they are. So this is, so again, you get some insights into who actually will be reviewing your proposal, but you won't know exactly who it is. And you'll get with NIH, you get this beautiful document called a summary statement, and it's a review of your proposal, a critique. And many times, we have companies that, of course, get that critique and they don't agree with the comments. And that happens, or there's two reviewers that just love what you're doing and one that doesn't. And, so we have to work through some of those things to refine, revise, and resubmit that proposal to NIH. And then hopefully on the second time, it gets funded, maybe not, but you got to be in it for the long game. And yeah. And then NSF is you have no idea who the reviewers are. And I served on a panel this past summer for a technology area. And I can tell you that there were some very experienced technical reviewers on that panel. Mm-hmm. So when, these agencies, they get the best or the brightest and the most experienced, especially NSF. So I think, with Sbir and HabitAware, being successful at phase 2, that's a big deal with NSF or even with NIH, getting phase 2. It's a big deal. It's a huge feather in the hat of the company because you have gone through a rigorous review, and it's not just the science, it's the business. And they certainly look at all kinds of other aspects of your business before they actually make the award to the company, because they want to make sure that you're going to be a good steward of our federal dollars. And we make sure there's systems in place in the company to manage those federal dollars.
Yeah. To catch up on, we've got the questions have been kind of nicely pouring in. So folks out there in audience land, I am seeing your questions. You're asking good ones. Maybe quick hit one. Greg Peterson asked about IP developed as a result of having it or work done with one of the grants. Does the agency take any ownership rights? And Pat, that might be a question to you. And then maybe more generally, for James and Sbir, what around IP did you think about relative to pursuing some of the grant activity? So Pat, if you would.
Yeah, so I think that's Greg from the university. So small businesses also operate under the Bayh-Dole Act, which allows universities and small businesses to profit from the commercialization of their technology. So the government does have a royalty-free license to use the technology for its purposes. And then there's these SBIR and Rsttr technical data rights that come along with getting an award, which are very attractive. And the data rights are now protected up to 20 years to coincide with the patent law. So I think there's, it's a critical issue that should be well understood. I always refer to, talk to your IP attorney with respect to that. But, there's been over $50 billion awarded to companies all across this country since 1982 under these two programs. And many of you probably recognize Qualcomm. Well, Qualcomm actually got funded back in the 90s by the NSF and I think by DARPA. And they've been able to profit from the commercialization of that technology since 1982 or wherever they got their awards in the 90s. And certainly they've, they're just the granddaddy of them all. But, we wouldn't have the success in the programs if the IP was not as attractive as it is. And so,
yeah,
this is, and the other part that's attractive about the program is, of course, it's non-dilutive funding, and you retain the IP, and of course you don't pay the money back. But the other thing is if you develop something that now has where the federal government can be your customer, and you can show that your product or service or whatever you develop resulted from or somehow extended from that SBIR or Rsttr project, and now they have a procurement opportunities, they can do it on a sole source basis. This is huge for me. So it isn't just the R&D. We move from the R&D into procurement, and
very nice. Yeah. So James and then Sbir, this like from your end when you were putting the companies together, did you have concerns about any of the IP things, or how are you managing that?
From our point, we had multiple licenses operating at once, and the IP strategy isn't unique to. I mean, if you're in medtech, then you need to have an IP strategy very early on, and that part wasn't any different. You do need to disclose any subsequent IP that it results from the use of the federal dollars. But to Pat's point, that's not very onerous. We had some issues with, educating potential investors on that fact and where you might want to disclose earlier than they would think necessary. Some people get squeamish when it comes to secrecy, right? They want to be even more secret than the entrepreneur. But from just an ongoing business concern, the IP portion of the SBR wasn't. I guess I never looked at it as a net positive or negative. It was just, it was part of the deal. But I will say I don't think that we filed IP subsequent to the grants, more or less as a decision, just because that was the way it worked out. I don't think there was like we didn't shy away from it, I guess.
Samir, what about for you guys? How'd that go?
Yeah, for us, IP, it was fine. The one thing that was a little bit of a, surprise, and maybe it shouldn't have been, probably just because we were new to it, is, once the grant actually got really close to coming through, not in the initial application, but actually after it went through review and they said, looks like you're going to get funded, then you have to submit like your IP agreements between all the partners on the grant. So our collaboration with the clinical partner, and universities will have a very kind of a blanket policy that they typically have, whether it's University of Minnesota or we worked with Marquette University in Wisconsin, and that may or may not work for you. So that's just one thing is just to understand what that is early on. And, we were fortunate we were able to work it through, but at the end of the day, the grant getting the grant would have outweighed any kind of minor IP quarrels that we might have had. It certainly could have been resolved. It just was fortunate that we were able to avoid it entirely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so when, one thing that I would add about the IP is, certainly, there are companies that of course seek patents, but you could retain the information as a trade secret. That's acceptable. If that's your strategy, then, that's acceptable. So I think, the agencies look at IP very broadly, and, patents and trade secrets, and I'm sure there's a couple other flavors in there as well. The other thing that I would say with the funding that a company receives, so IP expenses are not what they call an allowable expense. And so there's this other source of funding that comes along with the grant. It's called the profit or fee. And this profit or fee is generally around 7% of the total project. And that money can be used for whatever purpose you choose as a company. So, it may not be, maybe $17,000, $18,000, on a phase one, but it could jump, if you're talking about 7% of $1 million or 7% of $2 million, now you've got a nice little chunk of money here that can help support maybe some patent filings and so forth. I want to make, because I know patents are really expensive. And so we just want to give all those companies out there some hope that there's, you got to play it right, but there's hope out there to help support some of the costs associated with patent filings.
Yeah. One more question from the audience out there asking about if you receive a grant and you were potentially doing research in multiple sites, US and non-US, are there any restrictions, limitations on using the grant money in a non-US setting?
Well, all the research work has to be done in the United States. So again, this is where, from a strategy standpoint, when you're kind of fleshing out what the scope of work is and what's going to be covered by the grant, and then even though, and what may not be covered by the grant, and you're going to have to provide other funding for the external sites, which, where angel or outside investment capital certainly could support that kind of effort. So yeah, all the work has to be done in the United States.
And then one last one from the audience, a practical question, which is, can we already be partway into the product development process and still apply for and receive a grant?
Yes, that is possible, but it takes some discussion about what it is that you're going to propose for the project. And so now I'm glad this person asked this question, because this comes up all the time, and Kent or James can actually chime in as well. So with NIH, they have, like, I call it 3 different funding pathways. So you had the standard phase 1, phase 2, and then phase 2B. And then they also have what they call the fast track, which is a combined phase 1, phase 2, plus the commercialization plan. And then they now have, again, the direct to phase 2. So a project like the one that was just described, I'd be looking at the direct to phase 2. We're already, completed the technical feasibility work using our own funding, and now we can jump right into a direct to phase 2. But this is where you make the decision that, yeah, we're going to go down this pathway. We're going to really explore this, make a good decision about going forward. And then we're going to have a conversation with the institute within the NIH that has an interest in that kind of technology development effort, and really get clarification and confirmation that this is a viable pathway going forward. And so that probably the most important aspect of I think, of jumping into this program and really learning how to do it, is to have those very early discussions with the people inside the agency, that they can be your champion, they can give you insights that I certainly can't give you. And then they know what the hot buttons are within their institute. And that's going to be very helpful to a company pursuing this kind of funding.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly second that. Reaching out to the program staff is important early. They will help guide you into the program that fits your need, whether it is going directly to if the institute offers it, a direct to phase 2, or even a fast track where you combine the phase 1 and phase 2. There is a check in between those, though. So just to be careful of noting that. But yeah, reaching out to the program staff is imperative to help you. Frankly, to help you write. Early you can call them and help you write some of your work. I don't mean the actual writing. To be a check on your strategy, and do you like to see this? How should we best describe our research or our ultimate goals, that kind of thing.
Very interesting.
I think, this question comes up so often. And so what I encourage people to do is to, they certainly have a product development pathway. And if you say, I'm going to pursue this funding and I'm going to look at submitting something for like April of next year, well, it's going to take 6 to 8 months before you would have 6 months certainly to sort of get a decision on whether or not there's a high likelihood of being funded or not. And then it might be a couple of months there where, things kind of go dark, and then eventually you get this email, or you get this notice of award from NIH, or you get some other additional questions and so forth before they actually make the decision. So you always have to be thinking like 9 months out from where you are, from the time that you submit the proposal, as the start date for that project. So you have to, it's always a timing thing. comes up all the time, and it's always a timing thing, and what still needs to be done. Does it fit the profile of a phase 1 or direct to phase 2? And have I talked to that program person? You know, really get clear about what is that scope of work, and then what's the budget that's going to be allowed, because that will drive the what you intend to research and accomplish during that project. And then what's the outcome, and then how does it transition into either phase 2 or phase 2B, which a phase 2B is typically where we're looking at, you know, upwards of 3 million over 3 years to support FDA regulatory kinds of activities. So, you know, it's sketching this out over a period of 5-6 years, I think, is really important.
Mm. So in the last few minutes, I want to ask about, you've done all this work, you put it in, you finally get it. And then there's a process of, okay, now you've got a grant, you've got to do the work. And maybe Sbir, start with you. Could you talk a bit about what has been the workload like in managing the grant after receiving it?
Yeah, you know, it's not that bad. You know, the hardest part is certainly applying. And then once you get it, you have to, you know, you should do your best to do almost exactly what you said you would do. And any changes, you should vet them thoroughly with your program officer. And then as long as you do the work, you know, there's basically quarterly financial reports, which are relatively quick, as long as you have kept your accounting straight on your expenses. And then there's typically an interim report every calendar year. That's been our experience. Is, you know, we had a 2-year phase 1, so we submit an interim report after 1 year, and a final report after when it finished, and reporting, this is what we did, these were the results, and this is why we think this is what we think it means for future studies.
So it sounds like pretty reasonable things that if you're running a business, you're able to do.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think the biggest thing is just making sure in your application phase that what you're doing is stuff that actually makes sense for your business to be doing. You know, you don't want to submit and write a bunch of stuff that just to get the money, because once you get it, it's probably not going to be really worth it. You know, it sounds like a lot of money, but it goes quick, you know, when, you know, over 12 months or 18 months, and you're going to devote resources, people, time to actually doing this stuff. So you really want to make sure it's stuff that makes sense for your company to advance its goals going forward.
And that's probably a really just great spot to wrap it here as we come towards the end. Like, it's right where we started, which was this notion of it can be a part of your strategy, but you should plan for it. It should be a part of your strategy, not the thing that drives your strategy.
Yeah.
Folks, I know we've got a couple of other questions that are in the questions. I'm going to pull those out because some of them are relatively specific, and we'll do some individual follow-ups. Please, if you have other questions, you want to learn more information, make sure you Google Minnesota SBIR or Min SBIR, find website with Pat's info and the program and accelerator that she's got going, or shoot me a note if you want to get her email or whatever it might be. She's a fantastic resource for this community. And I want to say thank you to her, and then also to James and Sbir for sharing their experiences being entrepreneurs going through this process. And then say thank you to all of you for spending some of your afternoon with Medical Alley. Since we're probably not driving, I won't say drive home safe, but snow is coming down. Make sure you check for ice. Be healthy, be well, and thank you all for participating. Have a great day.